Hey everyone, Joe Waxman here. In this video, I want to look at the chart of Arthur Schopenhauer. He is a philosopher, if you don't know that. Guys, don't forget to hit the like button. Excuse me. And subscribe if you have not already. All right, this is Arthur Schopenhauer. He looks pretty interesting character. He was a German philosopher, born a long time ago, 1788. He's best known for his 1818 work, The World as Will and Representation. And I just want to quickly characterize his main philosophy, because it'll help us to understand him. Schopenhauer argues that the world humans experience around them, the world of objects in space and time, and related in causal ways, exists solely as representation, dependent on a cognizing subject, not as a world that can be considered to exist in itself, i.e. independently of how it appears to the subject's mind. Now, if I understand that correctly, which I think I do, I read it over several times and thought about it. It seems like what he's saying is that reality itself is subjective, not objective, and that sometimes it's almost like an anti-fundamentalist perspective, because a fundamentalist wants to say, this is the truth, I have the truth, and everything else is wrong. And usually we find that very strongly in religions. Every religion wants to claim that they have the truth. Maybe not all of them, but most of them. Now, there's going to be variations among that, but a lot of them, want to have a very claim to have an objective, proprietary ownership of the truth. The truth is this: it's found in the Bible or the Quran or whatever, whatever fundamentalist ideology you want. The proof that he's correct, which I believe he is that everyone has a different interpretation, right? You take something like the Bible or any religious book, any book in general, and as long as you don't have groupthink, well, even if you do have groupthink, you have different groupthinks, people will disagree because they're going to interpret it in different ways according to their own level of understanding. And this is why in Buddhism, they call it the world of Maya, the world of illusion, because it's completely subjective. It really depends on who's looking. You could take the same exact thing and ask 100 different people. You're going to get 100 different perspectives on what that is. That's why reality is not objective. And if you go deeper into spirituality, they will say the only objective truth is God. Right? It's the one truth, consciousness, you could call it. There's different ways of saying that even. But that in reality, in the world of mind and thought and word, that there is no objective truth and objective reality. And so that's why he actually tended towards Hinduism and Buddhism. He it even talks about that. The philosophy of ancient Indian Vedas, as well as Buddhism. So let's go back. That's just brief. I just briefly wanted to sort of encapsulate his main philosophy, which I agree with. Now, there's a lot of other things about Schopenhauer that I disagree with, and that probably most people would. He was not his personality was not very nice. He's very hypercritical, kind of nasty, personality wise, and that's obvious in his astrology, but we'll look at that. He was not extremely popular, especially early on. He started to gain popularity, but I think he became even much more popular as as time went on, especially after his death. He was among the first thinkers in Western philosophy to share and affirm significant tenets of Indian philosophy, such as asceticism, denial of the self. That's important to notice. And the notion of the world as appearance or illusion, Maya, that the world is subjective. And that's, it's not like that's just an opinion. I mean, yeah, it's just an opinion, but I mean, it's the conclusion of a mature mind that, because people disagree, and that there's nobody can claim to have my truth is the only truth and the right truth. That's just nonsense. That's how, like, that's what everyone thinks. All the idiots say that, basically. All the wise people of all time will say that the world's an illusion and there is no objective truth that can be spoken of. Nothing said or written is the objective truth. That's, a very firm conclusion of the wisest people who've ever lived, including myself. Not that I'm one of the wise, but I agree with that perspective. His work has been described as an exemplary manifestation of philosophical pessimism. Basically, with the same idea, I believe, as in Buddhism, that the world is suffering, right? Buddha wrote that the world, this Maya, is dukkha. This world is suffering. Often dukkha is often translated as suffering, because I did study some Buddhism, but it more accurately means dissatisfying, discontent. The world creates discontent or dissatisfaction, which I think is pretty accurate, right? Doesn't mean we don't want to live. Doesn't mean we're gonna kill ourselves, But still, we're nobody's really satisfied unless they're fully enlightened. That's the whole point. There's no material satisfaction. You can be a billionaire with all the power in the world. You're not going to be satisfied. Nobody's satisfied, and that's the whole game. That's the whole illusion of Maya. You're only satisfied when you've realized the self, realized God. The same thing. Okay. He was very influential, blah, blah, blah. There's a few points I want to touch on. Let's see. His father had mental health issues and drowned. They believe he committed suicide. His mother was a writer, and she gained notoriety in her lifetime, but she was very critical of him and actually did not like him very much. After the father died, they went separate ways, and she was very critical of him, probably because he was very hard to get along with. But so his early life, he started studying medicine, and then he went into philosophy. He moved around a lot as a child with his parents. His mother did not want him to live with him. I don't know at what age, probably when he was a little bit older, but she said she loved him, but she was very critical of him. And I think that's understandable, considering that he was just not a very likable or attractive person, both physically and personality wise. He had many sexual affairs despite his not being very attractive. He loved to have lots of sex with prostitutes and just people. Let's see. He studied science almost as much, or at least maybe even more, than philosophy. It was that time in Germany, there was a lot of thinkers, artists, philosophers, that sort of thing, and he based his work on Plato and Immanuel Kant, by the way. But Goethe was alive and well at that time, and he did come in contact with Goethe after he wrote his initial work. He sent a copy to Goethe, and they mingled, kept social circles for a little while, but eventually Schopenhauer proved to be too critical and nasty for Goethe, and Goethe went his own way because he did not like Schopenhauer's nasty, critical ways. He wasn't a very nice person, honestly. I mean, from what I'm reading about him. Here it talks about Goethe, and Goethe was working on visions and color theory and stuff like that, and so he took part in that. He got published initially because of his mother, because his mother was published, and then I think the publisher just sort of agreed to it based on his mother's success, but then eventually he became much more successful than his mother. And his mother was not very supportive of him or his work. She said nobody's going to be interested in that, you know. So she wasn't very nice herself, but neither was he. He got into trouble because of his nastiness, and let me see if I can find that. But in the meantime, I'll talk about something. He never married, but he had many affairs. He had 2 illegitimate children that died at birth or shortly after. He had a prophetic dream. An apparition of his dead father and his mother, who was still alive. So he was investigating paranormal phenomena and magic. He was quite critical of available studies, claiming that they were mostly ignorant and fraudulent, but he thought there were authentic cases, and he tried to explain them through metaphysics or manifestation of the will. He experienced periodic depression and declining health. He started to attract some followers. I didn't find the part where he pushed some woman who was like being rude to him, and she got injured and she sued him and she won, and he had to pay her a monthly payment for the rest of her life because he hurt her. So yeah, he like that. He's kind of nasty. Some of his philosophies are nasty, based on like I'm not gonna go through each one, but like, I mean, kind of racist views, kind of he was even he believed in eugenics, in, you know, the sort of willful planning of breeding, you know, humanity, and breeding out certain things. He was kind of he was a little bit racist, a little bit religionist too. Like, he had a very nasty impression of Judaism, even though he wasn't religious himself. Not that he didn't like Christianity either, though. So, but he didn't like that Christianity was based on Judaism. And he was very critical of everything, to be honest. Most things. Yeah, the darker races he didn't like. He was in favor of pedophilia even, and that's pretty nasty. So there were a lot of things that he just really did not have a nice view about race and religions, women. I didn't even read this part, but he probably has a very negative view of women as well. Women are directly fitted for acting as the nurses and teachers of our early childhood by the fact that they're themselves childish, frivolous, and short. That's the kind of stuff. Like, he's just nasty and like very opinionated in a negative way, and he made a lot of enemies. Pederasty, that's pedophilia. Heredity and eugenics. I mean, it's pretty gross. So he's a mixed bag, obviously. I'm not gonna try and paint him other than what he is, both good and bad. So let's look at his astrology, see if we can make sense of it. Okay, so Sun in Pisces conjunct Saturn and Mercury a little wider here. in the 10th quadrant, but ninth whole sign house. So a career in philosophy, academia, intellectual pursuits, higher, grad school study, like higher lofty mindedness because of the ninth house, and Pisces, right? So philosophy. I mean, and this does also explain his foray into sort of occultism and magic, especially with Mercury and Pisces. Mercury and Pisces can be very psychic because Mercury is, along with the moon, represents the mind, and Mercury and Pisces can definitely either, can go one of two ways. Either they can, because Mercury is the communication, so somehow they're communicating potentially with the unseen world. So even sometimes schizophrenia, but short of that, definite, mediumship, connecting with higher things. Now, of course, Saturn conjunct the sun, and Saturn in Pisces is going to limit that, right? But we did see a breakthrough into that, with part of his, he had that, what was it? He saw his dead father, and his mother was still living, and he had some psychic experience. But Sun conjunct Saturn is very restrictive, very hardworking, not so much interesting in Pisces, because Pisces is the opposite. Pisces is dissolution, expansion, right? No boundaries. It's been getting lost in the ocean, but Saturn here wants to sort of collect it, solidify it, crystallize it, harden it. So he has this dichotomy of this expansive Piscean influence, which is, arts and spirituality, mysticism, compassion, potentially anything creative, acting, music, things of that nature, subconscious, spirituality, and all that. And then Saturn, science, rigid, hard work, structure, discipline, authority, combined with Mercury, which is a little farther out, but still strongly influencing his sun. And that's the intellect and communication. So scientific philosophy is sort of where we can go with this, right? Bridging science, which would be more the Saturn and the Mercury, and then the Pisces and ninth house is the philosophy, the mysticism, asceticism, right? The restriction. Saturn is very restrictive. Saturn conjunct the sun or ascendant lord is going to have a very restrictive quality, or on the ascendant itself, right? If it's in difficult aspect to the moon, that's a little different. That's a lot more painful because the moon is the emotion, so you get a lot of restricted emotions there, but it's not affecting. It's not aspecting the moon. But speaking of the moon, wait, let's go back to this. I want to finish this. Sun is, well, so it's the second whole sign house, ruling the third cusp, technically even the IC fourth cusp, but so that's kind of difficult. But second, third, I'm going with second and third more because of just how this is at the very, 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 very tip of Leo. So I'm going to take more the Virgo side of things for the IC, even though technically it's in Leo. But so second and third, so speaking, expression, communication, intellect, writing, that's all going into Pisces, career, academia, ninth house, philosophy, that. And he was a writer. He wrote books, obviously, and he spoke. So yeah, and then Saturn is ruling again, like his houses are very, very off kilter. You can see, all crammed on one side and very expanded on the other because of where he was born at the time. He was born in Poland, so northern latitude. Saturn is ruling the 7th and 8th. Let's say that. Technically the 9th, but at least very much so the 7th and 8th. So his career, I mean, it's Saturn also is restricting his notoriety, his fame. And remember, Saturn is very long, enduring, long lasting. So long lasting, Sun is the significator of fame and notoriety and worldliness, success in the world. So his recognition, his fame was restricted by Saturn. His early works did not even, his first two books, I believe, didn't even get any attention at all. It wasn't until his like third book, I don't remember the exact details of that, but Saturn's restricting that, but prolonging it and making it last much longer. Because I mean, obviously, I'm talking about him today, and it's already you know, several hundred years after his birth. But so he's bringing seventh house, so business partners and others, relationships to himself. He had a lot of relationships. They just were not very well, they didn't end up in marriage, and they were probably not that great overall. Plus Saturn and Sun is not a great combination. Eighth house as well. So this is also, the eighth house is going, bringing occult interest into his mind, into his being, into his philosophy, but at the same time bringing it down, because the eighth house is that death rebirth cycle. So period. So it's making it harder for his worldly success, obviously, and bringing certain you know, people will tend to dislike him more. I don't want to say dislike him, but generally it can, eighth house can bring fall from grace. It can bring a ruination, reputation, damages the reputation, right? Yeah, and again, the relationship to the connection to the eighth house, you know, occultism, secrets, hidden things, that nature. And Mercury is ruling the 12th house, and again, this is hard to read. Third whole sign house for sure, but I see, so fourth, third, fourth. So definitely writing. Mercury is not in good dignity here. It's in Pisces. So again, it's interesting. But ninth house is good for publishing. So definitely writing books, publishing, intellect. And yeah, I mean, I think this is balanced out by the fact that his moon is in Virgo, right? So it is a full moon, and full moon is good for gaining recognition, because then the moon, the inner mind is bright. I'm gonna I apologize, I just have to pause for 1 minute. Sorry about that. All right. So the other thing that's interesting about this is that Sun is in Pisces conjunct the eighth house lord. Father drowned. Father commits suicide. Eighth house lord, death. All right. Pisces, the ocean. So that is quite interesting. Sun represents father. Even Saturn can represent father. Saturn represents authority or older people. So, but Pisces, eighth house, that's interesting. Okay. So full moon, as I was saying, full moon's bright, great for relationships, great for recognition, being, you know, making yourself known in the world, things of that nature. It's in Virgo. It's in the fourth quadrant, third whole sign house. So, also representing the mother being very critical of him. Virgo is very critical. He was very critical. But also these difficult aspects, the square to Jupiter and the inconjunct to Pluto, right? So his relationship with his mother was not good. She was very critical. She herself was a writer, right? Third whole sign house. And so that's very interesting. Virgo moon is very critical, very analytical. And Pisces definitely needs that in order to be more academic. It balances out the Piscean influence, because Virgo is everything Pisces is not. Pisces is, acceptance and embrace and boundarylessness and imagination and compassion and philosophy, spirituality. Not so much philosophy, more spirituality than philosophy. But it's just that huge expansive ocean. And then Virgo is that critical, analytical, organized and perfectionist type energy. Interestingly, he went into medicine initially, and that is very much Virgo related. Third house having to do with intellect, writing, communication. Fourth house is what makes them happy. So if the IC is in the third house, then they tend to be like, that's the type of person that likes to be intellectual at home, right? They go home, they like to read and write. Perhaps, go travel around the neighborhood and talk to all the neighbors and stuff like that. Short distance travel. But with Moon in Virgo, this is in the third whole sign, fourth quadrant, shows that he likes to go home and read and write and study and be very critical. And Moon in Virgo is just going to be very critical, right? I have my Moon in Virgo, and that's one of the things that Virgo anything really needs to work on is not being overly critical, really saving the criticism for where it's warranted, for where it's needed, because too much criticism can make enemies. That's the problem with Virgo, is that it can easily go around and spot, everything that's wrong with everything and just point it out. But nobody wants to hear that all the time. You have to be very careful. Every sign has their low expression that needs to be worked on, right? And with Virgo, it's controlling that over critical ability, among other things, but overly perfectionist and whatnot. Virgos are very uptight overthinkers, so it's controlling that, being less critical, being more relaxed and accepting, right? And his Jupiter is square the Moon in Virgo, square Jupiter in Gemini. So his philosophy is going to have this kind of hard angle to it, which embraces, difficult things like asceticism, life of suffering. I mean, that's also Saturn conjunct Sun, but Jupiter square Moon. Jupiter and Moon connection is good because it shows that the philosophy is getting in touch with the heart and the emotions, and that the Moon is being benefited by the expansiveness of Jupiter. However, Moon is okay in Virgo and Gemini, but Jupiter is not. Jupiter does not like Virgo or Gemini, and it's because it's opposite. It's rulership in both. It's in detriment. So this square is very difficult for Jupiter. It's producing, in Jupiter being his higher mind, his philosophical planet of philosophy, shows that his philosophy is going to be difficult. It's going to be very intellectual, but hard-edged with this square to the Moon. Not at all. And not only that, but this Moon has this inconjunct to Pluto, right? So that he's very emotionally dissatisfied. And so that's going to fuel his criticism. So he was an endless critic, right? and the moon is our emotional satisfaction. So Virgo moon becomes satisfied by having things perfect, right? By having everything clean and orderly and organized, and just just it's so uptight, but it needs to have like everything just exactly how it wants it, because Virgo is so picky and just so detailed, so organized, so critical, so analytical. So the Virgo moon gets satisfied by having everything perfect, right? But with this inconjunct to Pluto and the square to Jupiter, it's very painful. There's a lot of pain there. There's a lot of emotional dissatisfaction. And so he's going to be even more critical. He's going to be critical in a destructive way, even hypercritical. And definitely relating to his intellect, right? So he's very hyper intellectual, and at the same time, very imaginative and philosophical, scientific, So he has this very interesting dichotomy between this expansive Piscean nature and this contractive Saturnian Virgo moon, and then Jupiter and Gemini. Oh, moon is ruling the ascendant. So moon is the ascendant lord. So he likes to go home and study and write and read, and that's his thing, because that's, moon is representing himself, but a potential, like a very perpetually dissatisfied kind of sense of self. And then Jupiter's in Gemini, obviously, so it's not very good in Gemini's as far as like, religiosity, connection to God, spirituality. I mean, it's in a sense, yes, because the ninth whole sign house and Pisces, and that's why he found some, solace in Hindu and Buddhist philosophy, which is very sort of Piscean 12th house. But at the same time, he's very polarized, Schopenhauer. Like he just has some very low level ideas about like all the things I mentioned, like the racism, the religious, hatred of religion, and hatred, the derogatory, sexism, and what else? Pederasty, pedophilia, like, ugh. And I'm just like, having all these illicit affairs, even with prostitutes. But I mean, it's forgivable unless you just like, mistakes are forgivable unless you just keep making them again and again and again. Then it starts to become questionable, right? That's sort of how it was with him. It's like, okay, are you just going to keep doing the same thing over and over again? No, well, it's not so much a mistake then as a habit. So Jupiter in Gemini is good for the smaller thing, like intellectual pursuits and things like that, writing, speaking, teaching about writing and speaking, communications. But then but it's in the 12th house, and it's conjunct South Node. So South Node conjunct Jupiter, it's not super close, it's about 7 degrees, but South Node conjunct Jupiter shows innate wisdom, innate inherent philosophy. Now I have this in the 7th house in Taurus, South Node conjunct Jupiter, and it does give a fantastic amount of knowledge, of wisdom, of higher mindedness, even without a teacher. Like people with South Node conjunct Jupiter may have a teacher when they're younger, but as they get older, because it's South Node, they really have to be their own teacher, and they get knowledge through a kind of spiritual connection to the past or to the spirit world. So he has this kind of innate Jupiterian wisdom that is in the 12th house. So it is very connected, but at the same time, it's hindered by this by this Gemini. This Gemini does not really lend itself to big-mindedness. So it's sort of this, again, this contrast between, really very expansive spirituality and, Saturnian restriction, the Virgo moon, analytical, intellectual, and then the 12th house, South Node Jupiter, so spiritual kind of wisdom, but then contracted again by the Gemini. So it's really interesting, this polarity. Jupiter is trine Pluto. So the Pluto here is giving him psychological wisdom, psychological understanding, and he did include psychology. I mean, you kind of have to include psychology, but it gives a deep penetrating. Pluto gives very deep penetrating thinking. It is in the 9th quadrant, but 8th whole sign house, so it's bringing in some of that 8th house depth as well, and Aquarius influence, which is, he's got a very weak grand air trine here. With Neptune in Libra on the third leg of that. So there is a high level of intellectuality here. Maybe not as high as some, but the Gemini Chiron is here as well. That's interesting. It's not really making any difficult aspects, I guess. Let's see here. Oh, square to Mercury, perhaps. Square in between square to Mercury and the Sun. So again, Sun square Chiron, so relating to his father. Mercury showing, Mercury could be like his friends. So difficulty with friends and the father. Chiron tends to create rejection and wounds and painful situations. And as it matures and grows, or a higher expression of it is healing, teaching, mysticism, shamanism, stuff like that, even astrology. So yeah, and this could indicate that early on his philosophy was rejected. He was seen as a bit of a weirdo, outcast, misfit to some extent, but later taking on, gaining more acceptance. I think Chiron and Jupiter actually get along quite well because they can both be teachers. They can both play this. Jupiter's not considered a healer, but it can be, I think, if it's conjunct Chiron, because it's more of a philosopher and teacher. So yeah, there's that. His nastiness comes from this, the Mars. This is a debilitated Mars in Cancer conjunct the ascendant, exactly, because Mars conjunct the ascendant is going to be very aggressive. And Mars in Cancer conjunct the ascendant is going to be aggressive in not a good way, in a very emotionally based way, in a way that lacks dignity, in an unwholesome way. Right. And so he's constantly asserting himself. He's overly confident because Mars is confident and aggressive, but in a nasty kind of way. And then that's coupled with this very dissatisfied, overly critical, intellectual Virgo moon in the 3rd whole sign house, fourth quadrant, that has the difficult aspects, square to Jupiter. Square to Jupiter is not so bad, but this in conjunct to Pluto is quite painful. It's quite difficult. We saw that with his relationship with his mother, which was not good at all, right? So he's not a nice person. Like, I don't mean like in a really bad way. I mean, obviously not like a Hitler type thing. Like, he's obviously a philosopher, but like as far as like personality goes, he's just he does not get along well with people. He insults people. He's rude. He's mean. He's nasty. He's hypercritical. And at the same time, he's Mars is ruling the 6th house cusp, so it's bringing in that 6th house, fifth quadrant. So romance and poor quality romance. So he had a lot of sexual affairs. Mars is sexuality, male sexuality especially. So if 5th whole sign house, that's romance in poor dignity. So like even prostitutes, but also like just anyone who's not considered very high quality, not the most beautiful, rich, famous, or any, top class, maybe unattractive women, prostitutes, things like that, low class, low quality. not that somebody who's unattractive is low quality, but in regards to how society perceives them, in regards to their attractiveness. In any case, but also sixth house, so conflict coming to him, right? And then so he's being, like that example where he pushed that woman and she sues him because she's injured, and now then he has to pay a bunch of money because Mars is in poor dignity here, so it's not working out for him, right? And then Mars is also ruling the 10th whole sign house and the 11th quadrant. So 10th house, so for fame, for being an icon, for recognition, that's quite good. 11th house, groups and networks are coming to him, and that's also quite good. Even though it's not good dignity here, it's still showing that he's attracting this to him, right? The energy is moving towards him. So for getting in to teaching and groups and networks, anywhere where there's like a collection, that's quite good. Also for career success, 10th and 11th, and yeah, hopes, wishes, dreams, I guess, income. So he did quite well, right, for himself. Maybe not initially, but eventually, and certainly attracted a lot of negativity towards himself as well. Uranus is basically in the second quadrant, first whole sign house, first, second, and this probably just adding to his, explode. Even though it's pretty far from Mars, I think this is just making him more explosive, more spontaneously, just being like rude and nasty and overly critical. Especially with Sun conjunct Saturn and then Mercury, so he's being hyper, like really hard, like hyper intellectual, overly restrictive, overly critical, overly aggressive, shockingly so, explosively so, spontaneous, just just coming out, being rude, being overly critical. Like even people who he admired, like Goethe left him because he would just he's criticizing his teacher. He's acting out of place. Mars is not a, Mars and Uranus. These are not restrained planets. These are just like explosiveness, spontaneous aggression, and especially emotionally, and then hypercritical. What else? So South Node, Jupiter, Mercury. So this shows isolation, especially as a young child. However, Jupiter would mean that there's like teachers. Jupiter is ruling the basically ninth whole sign house, but 10th, most of the 10th quadrant, right? So early on, there was a lot of travels. If we take 9th and 12th, that's traveling to foreign lands. Mercury is ruling the IC, which is in Pisces in the 10th quadrant, 9th whole sign house. So like he traveled a lot as a child, right? And his parents he learned from his father initially, but he must have had teachers when he was young, so very influential teachers. And then as he got older, it's still the same theme because South Node is conjunct Jupiter, which is philosophy, even though it's in Gemini, but then North Node is in Sagittarius, so activating the Jupiter philosophy, but sixth house also, so very competitive. And he actually believed in kind of intellectual debates and fighting and criticizing. Those are part of his whole philosophy. So that's very much Sagittarius sixth house, right? And he taught his students. So he was a teacher, right? South Node Jupiter. He taught his students the same, to be sort of philosophically aggressive and intellectually combative. They go out there and, have intellectual fights and debates, in an aggressive manner, because he was quite aggressive. Venus is in Aries, so Venus is not in good dignity here because it rules Libra, so it's in detriment here, and it's in the 10th whole sign and 10th quadrant, so Venus is in the 10th, and that's quite good because Venus is a benefic. It's good for career, but it's bringing in 4th whole sign, 5th quadrant, so 4th and 5th. 4th house is what we love, like what we go home to do, what we do at home. Home is where the heart is. 5th house is childhood education, entertainment, fun, games, performance, creativity, things like that. So obviously these are rising up to public career, public image. What's in the 10th house is very visible in the public eye, right? So his Venus, so it's his what he loves, and also his early childhood, and also his education, his 5th house, his performance, his entertainment. 5th house is very good for like being on stage, gaining recognition, things of that nature. He did not have any children, and that might be because Neptune is here. Neptune is retrograde in the 5th house, 5th quadrant anyway. Venus is also ruling the 12th cusp, so 12th in the 10th. Foreign things, the mind, the imagination, the subconscious. These are going to play a prominent role in his career, but also these planets are making him, much more successful, like all of these planets together, because then there are even though this is the 9th whole sign house, is the 10th quadrant, so 10th house for career, public image, notoriety, success, and all that. So yes. Pluto's in the 9th quadrant, but 8th whole sign house. So his houses are definitely not easy to read because they're mixed. But if we look at Pluto in the 9th, if we say Pluto's in the 9th, that gives a very heavy and destructive relationship to philosophy, spirituality, and those things. It's in Aquarius, so very intellectual, heady, powerful, deep thinking, and destructive. And this is not very religious, I would say, because Aquarius, right? But in the 8th house, Pluto in the 8th house, it's also showing very destructive quality, destructiveness, powerful sexuality. Aquarius also, this could influence his relationship to partnership, because he did not believe in monogamy, and Aquarius love to be out of the box. They love to believe in all sorts of things that are just sort of non-conformist. So in other words, Aquarius very much lends itself to sort of polygamy, multiple sexual partners, especially with Pluto, 8th house influence, things of that nature. So yeah, his morality is definitely out of the box, and potentially destructive even, especially because of its difficult relationship to the moon. Yeah, I mean, if we look at this for his sexuality, well, we do also look for Mars, but Pluto as well. Then, especially because Pluto's in the eighth whole sign house, then he's not making connection between his heart and the sexuality. So there's two separate things because of this difficult relationship to the moon. Right. The ascendant has a nice trine to, oh well, the sun and Mercury in between. And that's quite good. And that's definitely a ninth house relationship. So adventures, philosophy, travel, things of that nature, higher studies, grad school, all that accentuated for him. And that's pretty much it, I think, for the natal reading. Let's look at the draconic chart. Okay, so Venus is in Cancer here, right conjunct the ascendant. Venus in a natal chart would make somebody very attractive, and he was unattractive. That's mostly due to this Mars being in poor dignity on the ascendant. But so Venus on the ascendant, Venus in the draconic chart on his ascendant would show that underneath he's very artistic, creative, and social, and definitely loves women, has a strong connection to women, and passionate as well. But it's obviously not making, good looks, because it's not his natal chart. So that's interesting. Here we have Chiron right above the moon, and that's adding to a very difficult relationship with the mother, basically a mother who rejected him, Chiron. Jupiter in Virgo. So Jupiter is not in good dignity either, because does not do well in Virgo either, opposite its rulership domicile in Pisces. But it's in the third house, so intellect, philosophy, writing, communication. So that is very telling of his career and his path. Ascendant in Mars and Libra. Mars, again, in poor dignity here in Libra because it rules Aries. And that is in the fifth house. Again, adding to his difficult romance relationships as well as children. Mars indicating active romance or active interest, at least in romance. However, not in good dignity, not the kind of fifth house, the education, fun, games, entertainment thing. It's just not, there's not a lot of positivity here with this Mars in Libra. His sexuality, romance, things of that nature. Moon right conjunct the natal north node in Sagittarius, sixth house. So that's furthering this idea of philosophy and combativeness, sixth house. Also service to others and so forth, critical thinking, but it shows a need, an emotional need towards that, right? Interestingly enough, that we got a really strong square to Jupiter and Virgo in the third house from the nodes. So Jupiter, philosophy, right? Virgo, critical, analytical, third house, writing, communication, intellect. That's spot on. It's totally accurate right there. Explains a lot about his life. The square shows something that is tied to the nodes of destiny, right? We get it here: south node Jupiter, Jupiter square the nodes, both in poor dignity. Very interesting. This is not making. It's actually right opposite Uranus, Neptune and Capricorn opposite Uranus. That's interesting. I've never even thought about that, because this would be a generational aspect. But it shows some sort of expansive, it's connecting to this Mars. I think this is like explosive, potentially delusional, something, he's being very rude and delusional at the same time, confrontational, in any case. And then we get this whole Gemini stellium here. Mercury in Gemini in the 12th house. And that is, highly intellectual, highly logical. Although 12th house will definitely lend itself to sort of secrets and hidden things, mysticism. I forgot to mention Jupiter in the 12th house will relate to sort of his fascination with foreign religions and philosophies like Buddhism, like Hinduism, as will South Node Jupiter too. But connection to foreign things, philosophies, understandings. Yeah, that's there. Okay. Let me see one more thing. Oh, I forgot to mention. Okay, Mars is out of bounds. Okay, why is that important? Because Mars is in poor dignity, it's conjunct the ascendant. So out of bounds means just going further, going beyond, pushing the envelope, right? So this poor dignity Mars is very aggressive. It's going, that's why he's like known for his being like, not a very likable character, like rude, aggressive, pushy, or hypercritical. He's just going beyond. He's out of bounds. He's like pushed a woman over who was rude to him. He was probably rude first, you can just see like that picture with the hair, and he's just not a terrible guy, but just a really difficult to like. His personality, a personality disorder or something like that. Right? So his Mars is out of bounds. Mercury and Jupiter are have a mutual reception here. That is a light square, but it's still there. So there is an aspect between them, and that's adding a lot to it. That is adding actually a strong intellectual component as well as a spiritual component, because Jupiter now is making contact with Pisces, Mercury is making contact with Gemini. So Mercury in Gemini is extremely clever. Jupiter in Pisces is very spiritual and compassionate. So he has that in him. It's just buried underneath a lot of almost like a cactus. Like he's very prickly and like you just get hurt touching him, but underneath it's soft and juicy and tender and whatnot. Right. So he's a bit of a sabra, I guess. That's what they say in Israel, the cactus. They call it Israelis sabra because they're like that, kind of rough on the surface, but soft and tender underneath. He also has a mutual reception by exaltation between Sun and Venus. Venus is exalted in Pisces, Sun is exalted in Aries, and they are exactly semi-sextile. So there is another exchange here. And that's going to be good for associations. Obviously, Sun is going to be, gain energy from this, which is his fame, his notoriety, his worldliness, especially in the 10th house here, clearly. And so that's why we can still talk about him today. And then Venus, 4th, 5th house, 11th and 12th house, because 11th whole sign house, 12. So for a lot of things, career, foreign relationship, home, and 5th house, even romance and education. I said these weren't so good, but they're benefited by this. So it's like not good, then good. It gains energy over time, I think, when you have like this mutual reception that benefits both planets. So guys, that's pretty much it for Arthur Schopenhauer. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a comment down below. And book a reading with me. My website is macroastrology.com and my email is macrogoldmachine@yahoo.com. All right, thanks, bye.